Your host, Christine Marie. And it's so funny. Tonight, as I was saying those words, I just had this moment of feeling so much gratitude for the opportunity to come on here and chat with you tonight. I find that there are so many aspects of our life, so many moments, so many opportunities where we get used to them. We start taking it for granted, whether it's an opportunity, a person, place, or thing that we just get used to, and it becomes happenstance. I believe today is 134 days of going live every single day, and it's easy to take it for granted in some regards and to not realize the blessing that it is to be able to come on and chat with you. And so even here in this moment, I just want to take a moment for myself to remember the very things that begin to feel ordinary are actually the very things that I once worked so hard for or prayed for or hoped for. And I hope even just in remembering myself that is something perhaps that can come to mind for you of what is something that perhaps you've taken for granted that you really wanted at one point in your life. And there's a semblance of responsibility that comes with that realization, the realization of this very moment, whether it's today or this week, where you're actually fulfilling and walking in the very thing that you worked for. And in so doing, it's this moment of pause, and am I actually alchemizing it? Am I actually really leaning into making it to be the best that it can be? Or have I actually grown lackadaisical? Have I actually gotten kind of lazy in this very thing that I once worked so hard to have? Am I actually really living into its fullest potential and my fullest potential in having this stewardship? And it really is stewardship. You know, there's something, actually, I was creating a video for my family's painting business last week, and I included this line, and we were actually speaking to facility managers of educational buildings. And, you know, there's an element where these facility managers, it is their job to tend to the building. This could sound like the most boring job in the world, yet on the other side, it could also be one of the most important. It is a stewardship. This building is their domain, and it is their beautiful job and beautiful responsibility to steward this building where the next generation comes and learns and dreams and is cultivated into literally our future leaders. And so these men, these women who are in charge of these buildings actually have some very heavy weight and responsibility around the way that they are shepherding this building. And yet we can look at it in that view, or we can look at it as just another 9-to-5 job, just another day at the office, or every decision I make today has impact on the future generation and impact on the future leaders of this country. And so all of a sudden, something so benign, something so ordinary becomes this beautiful gift. And so with that, I want to talk tonight about personal responsibility and personal branding, because I have found that so many of us actually view our personal brands through a lens that it can be either one or the other, which is, this is an incredible opportunity to steward and shepherd this brand of mine, or it's something that I actually perhaps don't prize and perhaps take for granted, and I don't even realize what an incredible gift it is and what an incredible weight that it is. And in so doing, we then can leverage and really invest for the sake of something greater than us. Yesterday, we talked about being subjugated to a superordinate principle, something bigger than us. Because once we kind of understand and come under the hierarchical rule of something other and bigger and greater than us, suddenly our lives are chock full of meaning. Apart from that, it is so easy to fall into depression, so easy to fall into this element of living life in such a small view. And then it really is a question of why does this matter? Because if there isn't something bigger, if there isn't something out there, if there isn't something bigger and more important than me, then truly, what is the point? Why bother? And yet when we have this very clear view of the superordinate principle, and we have a clear view of why what we're cultivating, nurturing, fostering, stewarding matters, then that fuels us forward into being the very best and having a higher standard for which you and I then abide by in order to ensure that we're actually making impact. And so talking about personal brand, there's an element there where we have to agree upon terms. We have to actually agree that you and I matter. We actually have to agree that you and I have a personal brand to begin with. And so when we think about what is a personal brand, there's a lot here that I'm excited to put into a framework in the coming weeks. Right now, when I talk about a personal brand, I just kind of want to go elementary. If you have any semblance of a social media presence, whether that's just a social media account, social media handles, where you're showing up online and following other people, occasionally posting. Let's say you're posting once a month. Very, very rarely, but you're doing that. Let's say that you also have advice that you give at the dinner table with your family. Let's say that you show up at work and you offer feedback to your boss, you offer feedback to your team. Maybe you actually have employees and you offer feedback to them. Let's say you actually have a vision and you have something that you're called to, something that is within you, that is driving you in the way that you show up every single day. Y'all, if there is any semblance of any one of those things, whether you have a digital presence, a physical presence, you actually have this desire burning in you of something greater than you is seeking to come out and inform the way you live. Y'all, if any one of those aspects resonate, then you surely have a proprietary brand, because no one else has your soul and your story. And with those two working in concert together, working in parallel, there are lessons for you to teach other people. There is something for you to create and achieve in your life. Even the very fact that we are made in the reflection of the greatest creator out there, we therefore are creators ourselves, because we are a reflection of him. And so therefore we have something which we are designed and intended to create. And if we don't start assuming responsibility for that brand, for that voice, for that presence, this ability to even be able to consider and conjure up the creation itself, we actually may not even be able to have the foundation from which to start, because we actually are not even there to begin with. If we view ourselves as so small, so we're talking about the subordinate principle, something bigger and larger than us, under which we adhere, to which we subscribe. If we don't have anything like that fuels us forward and powers us forward, and then we also are lacking any kind of semblance of worth in and of ourselves, we're not actually going to have the foundation which we need to then build upon. Because if we view ourselves as something that could be easily cast aside or set aside, well, then why ever would we consider ourselves worthy of an endeavor that is great? I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, Christine, I hear what you're saying, and I've just always viewed myself as someone not worthy of listening to. And y'all, I actually really understand that framing. That was something that was taught to me and that I abided by for many, many years of my life. And it did exactly what you would assume. It kept me small. It kept me within a box. It kept me in control. Like other people were kind of controlling my narratives, and I was subservient. So it's almost the question of if we want to be able to contribute to that subordinate principle, something greater than us, something bigger than us, we have to level up. We have to be brave enough Oh gosh, and it's so hard. We have to be brave enough to consider ourselves as worthy of contributing to that beautiful subordinate principle that it's bigger and more grand. But if we don't see ourselves as something worthy to begin with, then there is no foundation upon which we can stand to begin creation, to pick up the microphone, and begin speaking and sharing of the lessons. Y'all, I have so much respect for my father. Ever since I entered into being a partner of our family's 100-year-old business, I have come to just know him on a much greater level because I've seen him work. I've seen his employees respect him. I've seen on Father's Day, one of the employees swinging by and dropping off a Father's Day gift to my dad, who this gentleman, this employee of my dad, is 10 years younger than him. So obviously not, father-son relationship. They're much more so peers. Yet the way my dad shows up at work, the way he loves, the way he leads, the way he lives his life positions him to be such a model and such an example by which other men follow in his footsteps and actually view him as a father. And what a greater example is there than that? And so my father has lived and loved and led through example. And there's this other element of personal brand. It's example, and it's also by way of speaking out and sharing those principles. So my dad has led and lived by practice. And now I'm just like trying to pull it out of him. Like, Dad, I want to know the principles. What are the principles, the guiding beliefs, the guiding practices that have empowered the way that you've lived? They've served as guardrails. They've really moved you in the direction. They've been your why. I want to know that because I've seen the example through execution in practice of who you are, and it is so worthy of respect and so worthy of honor. And I want to know your why, not just the how or the what. And so in kind of drawing that out of him, it's actually been so interesting because it forces him to actually level up, to share the principles in addition to living the practice. It forces you and I to question, am I worthy of sharing something to somebody else? And there's something that actually keeps us rather safe and protected to do one or the other. To share the principles alone protects us from living in practice and not making a mistake. Or by living in practice, it protects us from ever saying something bigger than we actually live, So to actually do both, to actually espouse greatness and live greatly, that is daring greatly. And I say daring greatly because Theodore Roosevelt gave this speech called Citizens in the Arena in 1912 in Paris. And there's a section of that speech surrounding the example of the man in the arena. And I'm going to read this because I love this. I'm Googling it right now. I wasn't planning to. Citizens in the Republic in Paris, 1910, not 1912. And I'm just going to scroll down to find this section because this speech is so, people don't talk like this anymore. It's so good. Okay, I'm just going to pick it up here. The middle of the section talks about the man in the arena. And he talks about daring greatly. And for me, when I think about daring greatly, it is to both espouse the principle while living the practice. And so I'm picking it up just before he gets to the section on the man in the arena. Let the man of learning, the man of lettered leisure, beware of that queer and cheap temptation to pose to himself and to others as the cynic, as the man who has outgrown emotions and beliefs, the man to whom good and evil are as one. The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer, There are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride and cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort, which even if he fails, comes second to achievement. A second habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work which the critic himself never tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness which will not accept contact with life's realities. All of these are marks, not as the processor would feign to think, of superiority, but of weakness. They mark the men unfit to bear their part manfully in the stern strife of living, who seek in the affectation of contempt for the achievements of others, to hide from others and from themselves their own weakness. The role is easy, there is none easier, save only the role of the man who sneers alike at both criticism and performance. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the man who actually is in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Shame on the cultivated man, shame on the man of cultivated taste, who permits refinement to develop into a fastidiousness that unfits him for doing the rough work of a workaday world. Y'all, man, that quote just gets me every single time. This whole speech does. And my challenge for us tonight, as we're talking about personal branding, is what is our erring towards? And y'all, this is a challenge for me. And I'll give an example here in just a moment of just this afternoon. But let me drive this point home for just a moment. It is such a challenge for you and me to look in the mirror tonight and consider, do I err on the side of practice or err on the side of principle? Is it easier for me to live, lead, and love through principle or through practice? And whatever's the easiest one, it probably means it's, okay, let's grow in the other. And when I say principle or practice, I mean, what are the things that we espouse, these lofty accolades or lofty principles, yet we actually have never really tried to put into practice? We can spend all day sitting and musing on the power of habits and have a terrible morning or evening ritual. Or we can take all this practice and work so hard at the perfection of something and never tell others how to get there, or never actually think about what are the real principles that have allowed for me to do this, and then pass it down or pass it along. It's not just, passing down in transcendence of generations, or passing along in a lateral view of those that we live with, work with, and do life alongside. So what are we potentially keeping to ourselves, and what are we sharing with others that we have yet to actually put into practice and really try out for ourselves? Is it easier for us to point the finger at someone else or to actually hide light? And both of those questions are so critical, because it's not just one or the other, but it's, I shine my light in this one regard and I criticize others in another. So where do I need to strengthen my practice, and where do I need to strengthen my principle? And in so doing, we get a so much more well-rounded view of the entire picture, because showing up in the professional world emotionally, showing up in the professional world intellectually, showing up personally with my family emotionally, showing up with my family intellectually with my family. And y'all, I really love this because my dad, and I used him as an example earlier in terms of how he lived such a way of practice that we all could model and learn from. Yet now I'm really trying to pull out of him, what are those principles? What are the guiding values and belief systems that have really informed who he is, because I love what he's done. And that's where it's actually really beautiful, because a lot of the ways that he's lived have been rather on autopilot, and he doesn't really know the why in some regards. And so me asking him why forces him to go deeper and thus cultivate some real life principles. Others, he has really deep principles that he has in alignment with practices. And so the reason why this is so helpful is that as we're considering our personal brand, what is the point? Why should you and I cultivate a personal brand to begin with? Well, we have one, whether we like it or not. And so the question is, am I going to cultivate it with intention or live on autopilot, guided by subconscious default behaviors, not actually creating and curating my life to be one that I'm proud of, that I want, that I'm going to at some point look back on? This is why we call it a midlife crisis or an end of life crisis, is you look back on your life and you're like, what have I done? What do I have to show for it? And so by way of asking these questions now and then intentionally designing and creating our life, we get to be so incredibly filled and fulfilled. And man, we just get to live life on purpose rather than living life on default. And part of the way of creating this life by design is identifying what are the principles, what are those practices, matching them up, and then passing them down to our children, sharing them laterally, and really allowing for us to lead both by word and example. And one of the best ways that I've done this for myself is actually by way of writing my eulogy and allowing myself to use my eulogy as a mirror to show me, okay, where do I have principles that are not in alignment with my practice, and vice versa? Where do I actually need to adjust the practice, the behavior to align with the principle or belief? And where is there mutuality? Where is there, I guess you could say, it's not even just, where's their congruency? That's the right word. Where is their true alignment? Where is their unalignment? And frankly, where is there one entirely without the other? Not just unalignment, but where is one just entirely lacking? And the reason why it's really helpful to intentionally develop principles is because so many of the ways that we're living, so many actions we're taking are truly on autopilot, and we never have taken the time to analyze the belief behind them. And in the analyzation of them, we then come to realize, oh man, that's not mine. That is my dad's, that's my mom's, that's my grandfather's, that's my pastor's, that's my teacher's, that's my friends, that's someone else who's come into my life. I didn't even realize it. I was 10 years old, and they wrote a script for me, and I've been living in accordance with this script since I was 10. That's actually not how I want to live. Even though the practice is there, that's not the principle I want to live my life according to. And so as we stop, we kind of need to break something. You and me both. We need to break this divide, this divorced way of looking at our professional and personal lives. We need to break that divide and view our life as one big kind of melting pot. We need to stop viewing, okay, I'm going to build my business, build my life over here, and then come home and put my feet up. That is not how it works. Whether we're male or female, business owner or mother, y'all, we need to look at our personal life the way we look at our businesses, and look at our businesses the way that we do our personal life. How are the relationships within the business? Am I creating an environment where my employees actually are emotionally bought in to the mission, to the values of the business? Is there a psychological safety? My client talked about that last week in a webinar that we had, and I thought that was brilliant. Psychological safety, because if there's no psychological safety, there is no ability and freedom to truly create something new that could solve for a problem among our clients. The lack of psychological safety actually breeds lack of innovation. And so when we think about the dynamics that we want to have with our children, with our partners and friends and family at home, that same type of dynamic is really important to bring over. And I say same exact, I'm talking about the health, right? The KPIs, the metrics that allow for health and freedom and innovation and creativity in a relationship, emotional setting, and then vice versa. The intellect and really engaging that at work, let's engage that at home. What would it be like if we actually took a cognitive interest in our child and took a cognitive interest in our partner and really sought to understand? Y'all, I have a friend, and his wife never once, for I think it was about a decade, never once went to hear him speak. That's a big deal. He spoke down the road at like a university around his profession, and it was a couple miles away, and she never went. That sucks, because she only engaged with him with her emotional intelligence, not the intellectual intelligence. And so the more that we're kind of divorcing and having this divide between these intelligences are for this area of my life and these intelligences are for this, we're never ever going to live as a full-fledged human in any area of our life, so long as we're compartmentalizing the activation of our entire being. And so when I'm talking about the activation of our entire being, it's turning online every part of us, every intelligence, our intellectual intelligence, our IQ, our emotional intelligence, EQ, even our spiritual intelligence, SQ. Y'all, I have heard stories about people who have been like, I don't know how, but I just got what felt almost like this divine revelation about this product that needed to be invented. And it was completely new. It was completely almost of origin source. And when I say that, what I mean is that in order to create something truly genuine and truly new, it cannot come from out there, because otherwise we're just creating that which we know. If it's out there, then it's already created. But if we're going to create something very new, it has to be coming from in here. And so long as we're turning off parts of us from being able to be fully present in work or at home, we're not ever going to be able to taste and experience the true vivacity and this kind of like vicarious living. There's one of my favorite songs has this line that says, I want to live this one wild life. I want to rip it apart. And there's something about that man, it like stirs my soul. I want to live life so fully. I want to take it and experience it. This book called Die with Zero talks about building our bank accounts, not just with wealth, but with experience. And so my experiential bank is actually quite high. And yes, I'm working on my financial bank as well. But man, do I want to live life in such an experiential way? Well, that requires every part of me to be turned online. I just, 𝐤𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐲 on YouTube just said, what's your opinion on education system currently in the world? Oof, that's such a good question. In my experience, the education system, man, I'm so glad you brought this up, 𝐤𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐲, because there's so much around our education system that has been focused so narrow on one part of us. You know, we're talking about our intelligences and turning all of them online. There is, from my experience, there is far too little, if not hardly any, education surrounding the emotional intelligence, even the financial intelligence, the physical intelligence, knowing our body and allowing us to actually tune into how do I actually feel in my body? How do I actually take care of this whole organism that is actually going to allow for me to continue to mint money and lead my business well? You know, the more we divorcing these parts of us, it's not allowing us to be able to view life for the full, well-rounded picture that it is. Y'all, we are in relationships for the majority of our life. And yet we're not taught how to do relationships, how to exist in relationships. And so when it comes to this education system, the education system, for the most part, in the US was informed by Rockefellers, and it was trained to curate and spit out industrial workers, people who worked in factories. That's not our world anymore. And so if we want to have an educational system that is constantly evolving with the technological advances, with the advancements even of the understanding of the human being. I had someone on here probably a month or two ago, and she actually struggled with endometriosis for about 12 years. She had no idea what it was. And only in the last, so I think it's 1 out of every 10 women has endometriosis. Only within the last 5 years has finances in the government actually been dedicated to the study of this thing that it is within 1 in every 10 women. And so there's so much more to explore. There's so much more to understand, which is so exciting. But if we're constantly adhering to, like Kasim on YouTube said, if we're constantly adhering to the external systems and not allowing for every part of our intelligences to be turned online and participating in life, then if we're not allowing that, we're not going to be able to say, oh, you know, I think that there's a gap here. Like, I think that there's something really exciting for us to explore, learn. And the only reason why this woman came to know that she had endometriosis was that she would not take no for an answer. Another best friend of mine, he's had mercury poisoning since, I think, 15 years. 15 years ago, he really started having this manifest in his body. There's so little research and so little study done, but also really a real solution. And so he's had to do this deep dive and try things out. And so that's where understanding his physical body, the structure of the physique, but then also testing out what to eat and what supplements work, what doesn't work, what kind of habits and routines actually make you feel better versus not. So this focus on just cultivating the IQ, I really, really am so excited for us to add in these other studies, these other aspects of what makes you and I human to begin with. And it's not just for our own benefit. It's also for I talked at the very beginning, the stewardship. It's for the stewarding of that which we've been given, and the cultivation of it and the sharing of it. Y'all, we're learning things. You and me, both of us, we've got things to offer the world. I've shared this with someone yesterday. You know, he's been writing and musing over his wife passing, and it's just been devastating to him. He's learning things and uncovering things about himself that there's probably a lot of other people who need that. Y'all, this concept of knowing, I would have never found that had I not been utterly broken. And I probably would not have ever shared that had I not been doing it for myself. And so when we're thinking about our personal brand, when we're thinking about the pursuit of activating and turning every part of us online, when we're thinking about what am I called to and what's my purpose, and the examination of the principles in concert with the practices and vice versa, doing this work is so rewarding, not just for the world around us, but really also for ourselves. And y'all, I forgot about this. I had this realization a couple weeks ago. Even if, this is hard for me to say, it's still hard, but it's still true. Even if no one else moving forward was significantly impacted by knowing and by this thing that I really do genuinely feel called to, how I'm changing, how I'm growing, how I'm healing, that's still enough. And there's something really important for you and I both to acknowledge and truly believe, is that we're worth it. And even as I say that again, it's hard to say, because I do want so much more. Like I want education, the education system to fundamentally change, because I've just seen so much harm in only existing with one aspect of us activated, which is the IQ, and not paying attention to any other parts of us, and how damaging that can be. It can just devastate lives, devastate relationships, devastate your future. And so I care so much about that. And at the same time, the more that you and I are committed to doing this work, solving our own problems, the more we're going to have to share with others. But if we're doing this work of analyzing the principles and the practices and what's my purpose, and it's all for the sake of everyone else, there's something actually that's going to not just be missing, but actually keep us entrapped. And so when we're talking about functioning from the perspective of these subordinate principles, something bigger and larger and greater than us, yes, it can be other people, but it's almost like they're the layer in between us as the nucleus, the subordinate principle. And when I say that, I'm meaning the divine, I mean God. And then everybody impacted in between is kind of like the external world. But the more I'm vertically aligned with who God says that I am, with the ideal that I know, that I've cultivated, that I've dreamed of, and then living in accordance with that, the more I'm then able to horizontally with everyone around me have the external practices and manifestation of those principles that have been clearly defined, clearly delineated, and then I'm living a congruent life. But it has to be propelled from within, because if I try to live horizontally making an impact without the rooting and the grounding in terms of, this is what I feel called to, this is who I am, this is the purpose that I have in my life, then man, it's going to lack the depth. It's going to lack the capacity to withstand when the going gets tough. When like Teddy Roosevelt talks about, the man in the arena, when you meet the scorn, when you meet the critic, can I stand still in the arena, continue to fight when people are pointing and sneering and laughing, and they look very clean cut because they're not doing the work and their face isn't marred by dust? Will I still be able to keep going and maintain the why that is fueling me forward? No, these are really, really important questions. And the more that we dig into them, the more that we really can uncover some really incredibly important and beautiful truths, and you get to live a really beautiful life. Like my favorite line of that song says, I want to live this one wild life and rip it apart. I want to live and not just exist. And understanding the principles and the practices and how they work together really allows for us to live a life of congruence, and allow for us to not just be living and leading and loving externally, but actually also be able to share something rooted in principles that can really change beyond us. Yes, I can make so much impact by being the example, by embodying the practice. But the more I'm able to formulate those practices into principles, share those with others, then other people get to take those and then create their own practices as a manifestation of those ever living, ever breathing and fluid principles that allow for us to then translate down into generations, translate down, but also laterally, and reach more broadly people around us. But if we have not taken the time to analyze the why behind how we're living today, we're never going to allow for that external impact to reach the greatest breadth and depth that it can. And vice versa, if we're only ever paying attention to the principles and not actually the practice, it's like a really, really good coach who's never once stepped out on the court. And there's a lack of ability to relate with the principles that they're saying because I've never lived it. So, are we actually able to do both? And where are we one or the other? And where is there the disconnect? Where's there the unalignment and or misalignment? And then where have we never actually analyzed the principles to begin with, and we're just living on autopilot, just living on default mode? And as we explore the true why for every single behavior, every single belief, every single external action, man, there's so much more of life that we get to experience when we begin to ask why of them. And if we're brave enough to begin talking about them, that's the genesis of the personal brand, because that's when soul and story, principle and practice begin to come together to really make real change. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today.